continent of Africa stretches toward an infinite horizon. For more than 5 million years, life has thrived in this landscape of extremes. And it is here that the search for man's origins began. One of the oldest known signs of our arrival are hominid imprints dating back 3.5 million years. Indelibly set in stone, these age-old footsteps point the way toward our future. Though much about our lineage remains a mystery, scientists believe that humans evolved from primates, perhaps the apes that once lived in southern Africa. The day our ancestors learned to walk upright was an evolutionary milestone. Their striding gait on 2 legs, an adaptation that would define their place in history and set them apart from every other living creature. For more than 100 million years, dinosaurs ruled planet Earth, exploiting habitats in every corner of the globe. But 65 million years ago, their long reign would come to an end. Hurtling through the atmosphere, an asteroid 6 miles wide struck the Earth with the force of 100 million megatons. In the wake of this cosmic collision, the planet appeared lifeless. But insects, plants, and some small mammals would survive and repopulate the landscape. This is Purgatorius, one of Earth's oldest primates. It was an arboreal animal, climbing trees to forage for fruit and insects. Modern primates may have evolved from creatures like this one. In the era after the dinosaur, the Earth regained its life force, and vast tropical rainforests stood watch over the continent. For hundreds of generations, this lush habitat would nurture new families of primates. Life thrived in the canopy, where food was plentiful and predators few. From the treetops to the forest floor, ecological niches were filled by a diversity of primates. These sumptuous forests may have helped to shape humankind's direct ancestors. Lake Victoria in Kenya. Within its boundaries lies a small island called Rusinga. Over decades, this site has yielded remarkable evidence of human origins, including the partial skeleton of a distant relative dating back 16 million years. Discovered by a team led by Mary Leakey, Proconsul is the earliest known ape. No other fossil ancestor has been reconstructed in such detail. Proconsuls may have climbed trees on all fours. With their long fingers, they could grasp the branches firmly with fore or hind limbs. A peculiar feature of Proconsul's teeth was scientifically noteworthy. 5 raised bumps on the broad surface of the molar. This adaptation, unique to anthropoids such as chimpanzees, is also shared by humans. Its larger brain and lack of tail further reinforce the theory that Proconsul was a primate related to humans. But despite years of fossil analysis and ongoing scientific inquiry, it is not yet possible to name all the limbs of the human family tree. That human beings evolved from apes is a commonly held notion today. But when the idea was introduced back in the 19th century, it was pure scandal. In 1859, Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species, a fiercely debated work that outlined why the plant and animal kingdoms have so many diverse yet similar species. The theory of natural selection was based on the idea that over time, only the fittest life forms survive, passing on their strengths to generations that follow. 12 years later, Darwin would ponder human origins, but could not yet establish a clear-cut link between apes and modern man. In Darwinian circles, there was speculation about the animal that might bridge the gap. Illustrated here, this imaginary creature was named Pithecanthropus. The search began in earnest for evidence of the so-called missing link between humans and our primate ancestors. Come the turn of the century, fossils of a hominid were found on the island of Java, Indonesia. Commonly called Java man, we know this fossil today as Homo erectus, a man-like ape that lived less than 1 million years ago. In the 1930s, the fossils of Peking man were uncovered in China. Judging from the shape of their skulls and teeth, both Java man and Peking man looked more like humans than the ancient apes. Most paleontologists considered the size of the skull the dividing line between apes and humans. The missing link would be an ape-like creature with a larger brain. Hadar, Ethiopia, in East Africa's Great Rift Valley. This deceptively barren region boasts one of the richest fossil records on Earth. In 1974, a single specimen unearthed here would yield exciting new information about man's evolutionary past. In this unforgiving landscape, a joint French-American excavation team would find what they'd been seeking for 3 years: a partial skeleton of what was then the oldest known hominid, nicknamed Lucy. Formerly called Australopithecus afarensis, she is some 3 million years old with a small brain about the size of a chimpanzee's. Lucy's small skeleton had ape-like features, strong jutting jaws, long arms, and short legs. But this Australopithecine had a feature unique to hominids. She walked on 2 legs. Professor Randall Sussman of the State University of New York, Stony Brook, has been studying Lucy's anatomy. He says that survival in Africa's changing landscape required extraordinary physical adaptations. Dr. Sussman's tests compare Lucy's bones and musculature with those of modern humans and apes. The ancient bones reveal that Lucy would have been capable of walking upright on 2 feet. Of special note was the shape of her pelvis. Lucy's hips were wide to support the weight of her internal organs when she stood. In contrast, the pelvis of quadrupeds like chimpanzees is long and narrow. Within the spectrum of primates, Lucy's pelvis is more human than ape-like. From the hip joint, the thighs slant inward from the waist toward the knees. This structure would permit stronger legs that could carry more weight, lowering the body's center of gravity and making an upright posture easier to hold.
Enlargement of the brain and intelligence was not the first thing in human evolution. The first thing in human evolution was instead walking on 2 legs, bipedality, or bipedalism as we call it. Bi for 2 and pedalism for walking on 2 feet. So walking on 2 legs then is seen very clearly in Australopithecus afarensis, but at the same time Lucy and Australopithecus afarensis in general had fairly small, almost ape-like brains, and in fact many other aspects of their skeleton are very primitive as well. So we now have a different conception of what sparked the divergence of apes and humans, and it was walking on the ground on 2 legs.
Lucy, the ancient biped, stood less than 3.5 feet tall and looked a lot like the modern pygmy chimpanzee. But she walked upright with a gait not unlike our own. Her discovery was undoubtedly a turning point in man's quest to understand his origins. Ancient theaters of evolution. Africa's forests are man's primeval home. They are constant custodians of life, and the only place on earth that still harbors our nearest kin. These ecosystems, in turn, are preserved by the complex interactions of their inhabitants. With an arboreal design and intelligence, the first ape-like primate, Proconsul, was well adapted to life in the forest. Its descendants, among them chimps, gorillas, and man, still find sanctuary in his shadow. These are chimpanzees, the most human-like apes, sharing nearly 97% of our DNA. Molecular evidence suggests that chimps are more closely related to humans than to gorillas. Humans may look, sound, and behave differently from apes, but all of our differences lie in a narrow 3% gene pool. In the remote forests of central Zaire lives another distant relation. Little is known about the bonobo, or pygmy chimpanzee, identified as a species less than a century ago. Here in the forest, bonobos, a matriarchal society, rely on each other for food, protection against their enemies, and even emotional support. Among the higher orders of primates, bonding has increased the chances of survival. In many, sometimes startling ways, this society of primates bears an uncanny resemblance to our own. Bonobos can walk upright, unlike any of the other great apes. Intelligent creatures with a large vocabulary of vocalizations and body language, they are extremely social. And like humans and chimpanzees, they can be affectionate, finding comfort in the warmth of their friendships. At the State University of New York, Stony Brook, researchers are observing chimpanzees in motion. The goal? To find out how early hominids came to walk upright. Watching the chimps in action, they will try to determine what each muscle group actually does. Flexing, rotating, and contracting. The complex muscles attached to the pelvis and thigh bone are carefully tested with the help of electrodes. This exercise shows that the gluteus medius, a muscle at the waist, is essential for controlling the tilt of the pelvis. The same holds true for human anatomy. When we lift a foot to take a step, the pelvis tilts in the direction of the raised leg. The gluteus medius of the opposite side then contracts to stabilize the pelvis. Without this muscle, the sway of the body would throw us off balance as we tried to move forward. The action of the gluteus medius is examined in active chimpanzees. When the chimp walks on all fours, the muscle barely moves. But when it climbs a tree, the muscle activates. Sussman and his colleagues were surprised to find that the gluteus medius serves the same function in both chimp and human anatomy, rotating the thigh and maintaining the balance of the pelvis. But in each species, it plays a different role. In humans, the muscle permits a long-legged stride. In chimpanzees, a range of vertical motion with bent legs. With similar musculature in our pelvic areas, it's surprising that chimps became efficient climbers that didn't walk. while humans became successful bipeds. But as the dynamic in the forest changed and apes spent more time on the ground, the anatomy first developed to climb trees gradually allowed some primates to become proficient on 2 feet. Swinging through the treetops, heavier apes like the chimpanzee found that brachiating was a more efficient form of locomotion. Too large to scamper over higher branches, they would adapt both anatomy and behavior.
We are the only animals that walk habitually on 2 lower limbs in a terrestrial niche on the ground, and that's the major hallmark of our locomotion. Now, there's many other subtle aspects of our bipedality that make us very efficient and able to walk over long distances without becoming tired. We sacrifice speed and we sacrifice some of the agility of the, say, African apes, our closest relatives, who can scramble up a tree when danger threatens, or can scramble up a tree to get food and then come to the ground at other times. But bipedality, for reasons that we are not even sure today, bipedality conferred a selective advantage on early hominids about 4 to 5 million years ago, and walking on 2 legs became the fashion, became the hallmark of our species.
To this day, the cause of this biological rift between the African apes and humans remains unknown. With few fossils to go on, solving the mystery of what transpired when humans and apes parted ways has challenged researchers across the globe. Dr. Satoshi Hirai of Japan's National Institute of Genetics compares genetic maps in search of clues. Dr. Hirai found that as the number of generations increase, so do the number of genes that differ in animals that branched off from our primate ancestors. According to Hirai, a detailed examination of these differences can pinpoint when humans and chimpanzees split from their common lineage.
人とチンパンジーが分岐したのは
We've estimated when humans and chimpanzees split off from one another.
推定値を得ました。
The figure is about 4.9 million years ago. This number is based on the total base sequence, so the margin of error is just about 200,000 years, which is an extremely small margin. So we think it's fair to say that they branched out about 5 million years ago.
Long after their split from apes like the orangutan and gorilla, both hominids and chimpanzees had followed the same evolutionary roadmap. But their paths may have diverged in the wake of a change some 5 million years ago. For more than 10 million years, major tectonic activity had shaken the continent. Cataclysm of heroic scale that transformed the African forests. Volcanoes erupted everywhere, and the terrain of East Africa rose almost 2 miles higher. Waves of molten energy from the Earth's core surged toward the surface. The shock created a 3,500-mile fracture along the edge of the African continental plate, from present-day Ethiopia south to Mozambique. This barrage of tectonic energy dramatically altered the East African landscape, which until then had been blanketed by rainforest. Steep volcanic mountain ranges began to form along the length of the fault. Highlands rose, lowlands fell, and huge new lakes formed in what is now known as the Great Rift Valley. The Collège de France in Paris. Home base for Yves Coppens, a paleoanthropologist associated with the Lucy excavation. He believes that geological forces are primarily responsible for the differing paths of hominids and chimpanzees.
The
The fault itself was not a barrier, but the wall these mountains presented effectively became one. It prevented hominids on one side and chimps on the other from making the trip across and back. I think that all of these populations formed only one community, with common ancestors somewhere in the range of 8 to 10 million years ago, and that the population became separated.
Séparés en deux.
The appearance of this huge natural barrier had many consequences. It may have altered the fates of several species and changed the face of the East African landscape. In the years before it existed, the continent's tropical forests thrived on abundant rainfall, blown in on westerly winds. Later, Dr. Coppens believes that the mountains cooled the air, shifting moisture away from the range's eastern slopes. But the rainfall was the lifeline for Africa's tropical forests, and dwindling precipitation eventually caused major changes in the ecosystem as forest gave way to savanna. Though no record of their presence exists, the ancestors shared by hominids and chimpanzees were clearly tree dwellers who had prospered in the once lush forests. Now, they would have to adapt or perish. These new environmental pressures triggered the changes that led to human evolution. Long ago, one of man's oldest hominid ancestors may have made her home to the east of this rugged Ethiopian range. But the present-day landscape offers few clues about the ecosystem of her day. What is known is that volcanic rock from the site where Lucy was found contained the pollen of 3 million-year-old plants. Professor Raymond Bonfils of the University of Marseille, France, is hoping that pollen analysis will provide further insights into Lucy's habitat. A huge amount of rice pollen had emerged from the rock, along with that of a number of trees. With Africa's tropical forests on the decline, new vegetation such as rice plants were thriving in these grasslands, where rainfall was plentiful but seasonal. For many creatures, survival meant adapting to a new habitat and diet. Lucy and other Australopithecines must have ventured out of the forest to explore life in the wide-open savanna.
And to the east, between the rift and the Indian Ocean, the forest was declining little by little. Replacing it, during the first phase of the decline, were a patchwork of smaller forest and savanna. There were still forests where hominids walked and also climbed.
Marche, mais grimpe. Et deuxième phase,
In the second phase, where the terrain was drier, they walked but no longer climbed.
marche, mais ne grimpe plus.
These miles of grassland have become Earth's most fertile hunting grounds for fossils of our hominid past. As the forests faded, the animals that remained soon learned that food was more difficult to come by. Although no one knows for sure why our ancestors became bipedal, new strategies for foraging may have provided the impetus. Negotiating the vast African plains would be an evolutionary challenge. With greater distances to travel between food sources, hominids required a more efficient means of locomotion. Walking upright was the bold solution. So different was this evolutionary adaptation that many experts consider it the turning point when the hominid line parted ways with the apes. Mahale, on Lake Tanganyika, Tanzania. The area is nestled in the western side of the mountains, where deep forests remain. The region is a haven for chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, creatures that did not habituate to walking on two legs. Exploring new and sometimes dangerous territory, our common ancestors may have become bipedal as the need for protection and defense became greater. In the bountiful forests of the Western Divide, life probably continued much like it had for millions of years. Dr. Copon believes that the animals which remain tree dwellers are related to modern-day chimpanzees. Chimps had great potential as bipeds, had circumstances allowed. But then, life might have taken a different twist.
On peut dire, en tout cas, dans l'état actuel des connaissances,
One could say, in any case, from what we know now, that if equatorial Africa had remained completely forested, we would still be apes adapted to that forest, swinging happily in the trees.
dans les arbres.
As the planet stirred anew, our ancestral forests vanished into history. In the aftermath, the next act in the evolution of humankind would unfold. Unsuspecting players in an age-old drama, apes would thrive on either side of Africa's Great Divide, their fate sealed by an accident of geography. The savanna posed new challenges for hominids that had evolved from forest dwellers. Here, walking upright had its advantages. Among them, the use of the arms to carry loads and the ability to spot danger in exposed terrain. Miles of sun-parched landscape were the domain of a diverse and ferocious group of predators, and there were few places to hide when they were on the attack. To To avoid sharing their kill with intruders, leopards muscle them up a tree. Rare specimens from these hunts can be found in South Africa. Bones that tumbled into a cave and fossilized. Deer and rabbit are among the most common fossilized remains here. But evidence of a new man-ape was also recovered. The fossils of Paranthropus robustus, or robust almost man, a hominid that appeared 2 million years after Lucy. In the back of its skull were 2 enormous puncture marks. The holes are a perfect match with the fangs of a leopard's jaw from that era. Even solidly built hominids like this one were not immune from attack. The size and shape of the brain somewhat resemble a gorilla's and weigh about the same as Lucy's, just over a pound. But other features of the skull are more human-looking. Alongside the ancient hominid, paleontologists recovered artifacts never seen in Lucy's era. Stone tools. The accepted theory is that only after the brain had enlarged and intelligence developed could hominids fashion tools out of stone. But with its still primitive-sized brain, was Paranthropus robustus a toolmaker? For Dr. Sussman, the answer may not lie with the brain, but in the anatomy of the hands.
Animals that have this metacarpal head and these added muscles that we find in humans and presumably in these early human ancestors, these animals are able to do what humans and presumably our early ancestors could do, namely pick up an object between the thumb and the fingers, pick up an object with a refined precision grasp. Chimpanzees and gorillas, when they similarly grasp small objects, they grasp them between the edge of the thumb and the side of the index finger in a very less effective precision type grasp. So chimpanzees and gorillas pick up small objects like this. Humans, and presumably our early ancestors who had these additional muscles, pick up small objects not like a chimpanzee, but in a more advanced precision way where the thumb is opposed to the other fingers. So here we have an ape-type precision grasp, and here we have a human-type precision grasp. They're very different, and the two types of grasp reflect this primitive morphology in the case of a chimpanzee, and the more advanced morphology in the case of a modern human or a human ancestor.
This is the hand of Paranthropus robustus. Like a modern human's, his thumb bone is thick, indicating well-developed muscles. It is also splayed. These signs tell Sussman that tool-making was within reach. To pick up a small object, humans use the tips of our thumbs and forefingers. Though we do it unconsciously, this movement requires precise control. With long, slender hands and a narrow thumb, it's doubtful that Lucy's family were toolmakers, though they may have used them. Their bones look more like chimpanzees than modern humans. The chimpanzees' thumbs are disproportionately short and thinner than their fingers, with very little muscle tone. With hands like hooks, chimpanzees are not dexterous enough with their thumbs to retrieve and manipulate small objects, and it's likely that Lucy fared no better. Dr. Sussman believes that with the evolution of fully opposable thumbs, Paranthropus robustus became one of the planet's first tool makers. Lucy's arrival 3 million years ago marked a turning point in history. No longer dependent on forelimbs for walking or swinging through the treetops, our hominid ancestors used their hands to gather food, work with tools, and perhaps even to communicate with others. Over the course of millennia, the bipeds of Africa's great savannas became highly proficient walkers. About 1 million years after the appearance of Paranthropus robustus, another hominid had climbed a rung on the evolutionary ladder. Its fossils were recovered in 1984 from Lake Turkana in northern Kenya. At just under 6 feet, Homo erectus was tall and long-legged, with a physique and striding gait resembling modern humans. More than 2 million years after the emergence of the planet's first hominids, our ancestors walked much like we do today. Standing erect led to another pivotal evolutionary change: the ability to speak. Earlier hominids, like Lucy, had walked with a slight stoop. With narrow throats and larynxes constricted by their posture, they could not produce the complex sounds that compose human speech today. When Homo erectus stood up straight, his vocal cords had much more room to reverberate sound. This anatomical adaptation would open a new avenue of verbal communication that would revolutionize human development. With double the brain weight of his older cousin Lucy, Homo erectus was undoubtedly a more intelligent being, but his capacity did not yet match the level of humankind today. It would take another 1 million years for modern man to evolve. Intelligent beings like early Homo sapiens formed complex societies, produced art and sophisticated tools, and spoke a language. They now had the power to shape their future. "3 million years ago, Lucy, the planet's first biped, began the long march toward civilization, relinquishing her niche in the forest of her birth. Today, humankind's success as a species is no longer a simple matter of physical design. The development of a brain that can convey information, organize a defense, create art, and invent the wheel is challenging age-old patterns of evolution. For millions of years, all manner of life took sanctuary in the great forests of Africa. They include the higher mammals, the families of intelligent primates to which we humans may owe our ancestry. When the Earth shuddered, forcing early hominids to explore new terrain, the changes would reverberate over thousands of generations. Random acts of nature turning man-like apes into ape-like men, and finally into Homo sapiens, the wise human, with the daunting task of living up to its name.